Welcome to the world of Captain James Cook, a man who charted the unknown and reshaped our maps. Tonight, we embark on a journey with this remarkable explorer, tracing his epic voyages across the vast Pacific. Settle in, find a cozy spot, and allow yourself to drift into the stories we'll share. Perhaps a soft blanket, a warm drink, whatever brings you that deep sense of comfort. Let your shoulders relax, just let them fall. Now, where are you tuning in from tonight, and what time is it for you? Evening, is it? Or perhaps it's a bright early morning in your wonderfully unpredictable day. Either way, I'm so glad you're here. If you enjoy these quiet explorations, consider subscribing so you don't miss a single chapter. And speaking of chapters, let's turn the page back, way back, to the 18th century, a time when the world felt so much larger, and the call of adventure echoed across the seas, beckoning men like Captain Cook to sail beyond the horizon. The wind, sharp and tasting of salt, whipped at young James's coarse woolen tunic as he trundled along the muddy lane. Sunlight, though not yet direct, still warmed the back of his neck, a familiar comfort in the often dreary Yorkshire landscape. The village of Great Ayton, nestled amidst rolling hills, hummed with the quiet industry of its people. Men and women alike were deeply entwined with the earth's rhythms. Harvest time meant long days bent over the soil, hands calloused and backs aching, a necessity for survival as the year's bounty dictated the year's sustenance. Even at his tender age, James understood the constant effort required to simply keep hunger at bay. He often found himself drawn to the distant gleam of the North Sea, a vast, shimmering expanse that promised both peril and possibility. His father, a man etched with the lines of hard work and worry, spoke of the unforgiving nature of their land and the limited chances it offered beyond the immediate struggle. Yet when James spoke of the sea, of ships with tall masts and sails that caught the wind, his father's face would soften, a flicker of memory crossing his features. It was a world apart, a realm where fortunes could be made or lost on the wind of the wind and the skill of one's hand. Following this thread of longing, James found himself apprenticed to a shopkeeper in the bustling coastal town of Whitby. The salty tang of the air here was potent, mingling with the smells of drying fish and tarred rope. The docks teemed with activity, a vibrant testament to Britain's growing reach across the waves, a constant need for sturdy vessels and seasoned crews. Here, amongst the cacophony of seagulls and shouting merchants, James felt a pull stronger than any he had known, a destiny waiting to be grasped. His new master, a stern but fair man named Mr. Watson, quickly recognized a keen mind and diligent spirit in the boy. While others his age might have shirked the arduous tasks, James threw himself into them with an almost feverish energy. Sweeping the shop floor until it gleamed, stacking crates with precision, and learning the trade of accounting, each chore was met with a focus that hinted at a deeper purpose. He learned to measure things, to understand quantity and value, skills that would serve him well in charting the unknown. The sheer effort of navigating these early years was a constant test of his young mettle. The limited coin of the realm meant every purchase required careful consideration, every need a measured approach. He learned early that surplus was a luxury few could afford, and his small savings were hoarded with a discipline born of necessity. This practical understanding of resources, of what was truly needed versus what was merely desired, would become a cornerstone of his character, a quiet strength that would later guide his decisions. It was during this time that the sheer scale of the maritime enterprise truly began to impress itself upon him. He saw the great collier ships, their hulls laden with coal, being built and launched from the very docks where he worked. These vessels, stout and built for the harsh North Sea, were the lifeblood of industry, and the men who sailed them were vital cogs in a much larger machine. He would watch them with a mixture of awe and apprehension, their weathered faces and confident strides speaking of a life both challenging and strangely compelling. One blustery afternoon, a chance encounter with a ship's captain, a man whose eyes seemed to hold the glint of distant horizons, changed the course of his young life. The captain, impressed by James's quiet diligence and the intelligent questions he posed about navigation, offered him a place aboard one of his vessels. It was a daunting prospect, a leap from the solid ground of the shop into the unpredictable embrace of the sea. Yet, the opportunity to learn the craft of seamanship firsthand, to understand the stars and the tides, was an irresistible siren's call. The enlistment into the Royal Navy was not a grand affair, but a starkly practical one. He joined as a deckhand, his days filled with the back-breaking labor of hauling ropes, swabbing decks, and learning the intricate language of the ship. The discipline was severe, the commands sharp and unwavering. Yet, even amidst the grueling routine, James found a strange satisfaction in the order and purpose of it all. The constant need to prove himself, to master each new task with unfailing accuracy, became a driving force, honing his innate abilities. He quickly learned that survival at sea depended on more than just strength. It required a keen observation and a methodical approach. The way the sails were trimmed, the subtle shifts in the wind's direction, the very feel of the ship beneath his feet. These were lessons delivered not in classrooms, but through experience, often with the sting of a reprimand for a mistake. He absorbed it all, his mind cataloging details, his hands becoming adept with knot and canvas. This period of his early naval career was a crucible, forging the resilience that would define him. He faced the harsh realities of life aboard a man-of-war, a confined world where every man's contribution was vital. The shared hardship, the reliance on one another for safety and success, created a unique bond amongst the crew. He observed how experienced officers guided their men, their decisions born from years of navigating both the sea and the complex social fabric of the ship. He also witnessed firsthand the constant demand for skilled navigators, men who could accurately chart coastlines and guide ships through treacherous waters. The maps he saw, often imperfect and riddled with guesswork, highlighted a significant gap in Britain's growing maritime ambitions. This realization sparked a quiet ambition within him: to contribute to a more precise understanding of the world's watery expanses, to bring order to the chaos of uncharted seas. The training was relentless, pushing him to his limits and beyond. He learned to calculate distances using celestial bodies, a complex dance of mathematics and observation that required absolute precision. Even the simplest task, like taking a sounding to gauge the depth of the water, demanded careful attention to detail. He understood that a single miscalculation could have devastating consequences, a thought that lent a serious gravity to his every action. Thus, the foundation was laid, not in grand pronouncements or inherited titles, but in the gritty reality of hard work, practical learning, and an unshakable resolve. The seed of the mariner, planted in the soil of necessity, was beginning to sprout, reaching for the distant, beckoning horizon. Around the naval yards of Whitby, the familiar sounds of shipwrights' hammers continued their ancient rhythm. The chill of the English Channel air still clung to young James, even as the familiar salt-laced breeze of the Yorkshire coast now whipped around him. His days in the fields of Eyrie Home had taught him the rhythm of the earth, but it was the ceaseless whisper of the waves against the shore that truly sang to his soul. He watched the ships in the harbor, their masts like skeletal fingers reaching towards a sky far beyond the village limits, and felt a pull as strong as the tide itself. The apprenticeship his father had secured for him in Whitby with the coal merchant Mr. Watson was a practical step, a way to earn a living, but it was the mastery of the ships themselves that captured his imagination. He learned the language of ropes and sails, the heft of a marlinspike, and the sheer physical effort required to keep a vessel afloat. The unforgiving nature of the sea demanded constant vigilance. A moment's inattention could spell disaster, a truth his mentors hammered home with sharp words and harder knocks. He saw how the sturdy collier ships, designed to carry heavy loads through often rough seas, were built for endurance, much like the men who sailed them. These vessels, though not grand warships, were the workhorses of the burgeoning British trade, and learning their intricacies felt like learning the secrets of a powerful, ancient craft. The days bled into years, each spent deepening his understanding of the sea's moods and demands. He felt the deck shift beneath his feet with a familiar roll, a sensation that became as natural as breathing. He learned to read the subtle changes in the sky, to anticipate the wind's next breath, and to trust his own hands to guide the ship safely through storms that sent lesser men to their knees. This rigorous training, spent in the company of seasoned mariners who rarely spoke of home and always looked towards the horizon, forged a resilience within him that no amount of hardship could break. When the call for men to serve His Majesty's Navy came, it was not a daunting prospect, but a logical next step. He saw the larger warships, their towering masts and endless rows of cannon, as the apex of seafaring skill and power. Enlisting meant a structured life, a clear chain of command, and the opportunity to learn from the best. He felt a surge of purpose as he signed his name, knowing that the practical skills honed in the coal trade would serve him well in this more organized and perhaps more dangerous realm. His early years in the Navy were a baptism by fire, demanding constant adaptation to new ships and new duties. He learned to work seamlessly with a crew, understanding that each man's role, no matter how small, contributed to the ship's overall survival. The rigorous discipline, though often harsh, instilled a sense of order and efficiency that he would carry with him throughout his career. He observed the skilled navigators, their faces etched with concentration as they plotted courses by the stars, and absorbed every detail of their craft. The ships he served on were often far from comfortable, their cramped quarters and monotonous diet testing the endurance of every soul aboard. Yet, even amidst the grueling routines and the constant threat of the elements, he found a peculiar satisfaction in the mastery of his profession. The vastness of the ocean, stretching endlessly in every direction, held both a humbling and an exhilarating power. He felt the salt spray on his face, heard the creak of timbers, and knew this was where his life's purpose lay, etched in the sea charts and the stars. His skill as a navigator, particularly his ability to accurately chart coastlines and hazards, did not go unnoticed. He learned to meticulously record soundings, noting the depth of the water and the nature of the seabed, painstakingly mapping the watery world. This detailed work, carried out with quill and ink under the dim glow of lanterns, was crucial for other ships that would follow. He felt a deep sense of responsibility in this task, knowing that accurate charts could prevent the very kind of disasters he had witnessed others endure. As Britain's maritime reach expanded, the need for precise navigation became paramount. He saw firsthand the risks posed by uncharted territories, the hidden reefs and treacherous currents that could swallow unsuspecting vessels whole. The maps of distant lands, often vague and riddled with guesswork, were a constant reminder of how much of the world remained a mystery, a blank space waiting to be filled in. One particular challenge that tested even the most experienced mariners was the intricate and unforgiving nature of coral reefs. These underwater formations, while teeming with vibrant life, presented a constant threat to wooden hulls. their sharp edges capable of tearing a ship apart with terrifying speed. The approach to any coastline known for such hazards required immense patience and unwavering attention from the lookout and the helm. The crew of the Endeavour, a vessel designed for scientific exploration as much as naval service, was a diverse gathering of skilled individuals. Experienced officers like Cook himself worked alongside eager young midshipmen, seasoned sailors who had spent their lives at sea, and learned gentlemen dedicated to scientific inquiry. Each man brought a unique set of skills and perspectives, bound together by the shared mission and the common, often perilous environment of the open ocean. During a voyage to the Pacific, the Endeavour found itself navigating waters off a vast, unknown continent. The coastline, though appearing serene from a distance, concealed a formidable danger, a sprawling network of coral later known as the Great Barrier Reef. The task of charting this region was fraught with anxiety. The ship had to steer a careful course, relying on the shallow dips of the lead line to gauge the depth and the sharp eyes of the lookouts to spot the telltale whitecaps of submerged coral heads. The constant low hum of activity aboard the Endeavour was the backdrop to this delicate work. Men took turns sounding the depths, their voices calling out the measurements, while others meticulously recorded them in logbooks. The navigator himself, with compass and charts spread before him, wrestled with the complexities of the coastline, trying to translate the raw data into a reliable map. A palpable tension ran through the ship, a shared awareness of the immense risk involved in penetrating these uncharted waters. Then, with a sickening jolt that sent tremors through the timbers, the Endeavour ran aground. The sound of coral scraping against the hull was a harsh, grating noise that spoke of deep damage. A wave of fear washed over the crew as they felt the ship list, its steady movement arrested by the unyielding reef. For a heart-stopping moment, the vast ocean seemed to hold its breath, and the men braced themselves for the worst, their thoughts turning to survival. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of urgent activity. The captain, his face set with determination, directed the crew in a desperate race against time and the sea. They worked with a frantic energy, assessing the damage, trying to lighten the ship, and praying for a change in the tide to free them. The very ingenuity and resilience that had served them well in calmer waters were now called upon with every fiber of their being. They knew that if the ship could not be made seaworthy, their journey, and perhaps their lives, would end here, amidst this silent, colorful graveyard of coral. Through careful observation and tireless effort, using every scrap of available material, the crew managed to patch the gaping hole in the hull. They caulked seams with rope fibers and tar, improvising repairs that spoke volumes about their resourcefulness. The successful, albeit precarious, mending of the ship brought a collective sigh of relief, a fragile hope that they might yet continue their mission. The experience left an indelible mark, a stark reminder of the raw power of nature and the vulnerability of their Endeavour. As they sailed away from the treacherous reef, the men looked back at the alien beauty of the coastline they had just navigated. The land itself, with its strange vegetation and unfamiliar sounds, was a marvel. They saw in the distance a coast that had been merely a conjecture on paper, now rendered with a newfound accuracy thanks to their harrowing ordeal. This charting, though born of peril, was the very purpose of their voyage, expanding the known world one painstaking mile at a time. The awe in their observations of this strange new coastline was mixed with a quiet pride in their accomplishment. They had faced a formidable natural barrier and, through skill and perseverance, had overcome it, adding a vital piece to the world's understanding of its geography. The meticulous process of taking soundings and drawing each curve of the coast had been a testament to the scientific rigor of their mission. A question lingered in the minds of many of the sailors as they sailed on. How many other such unseen perils lay hidden beneath the waves, waiting to test the resolve of future explorers? The experience had been a stark lesson in the necessity of thorough preparation and the courage to face the unknown. The gentle rhythm of the waves against the hull returned, a comforting sound after the terror of the grounding. The shared ordeal had forged a stronger bond among the men. They had faced a daunting challenge, and through their collective effort and the steady leadership of their captain, they had emerged, battered but unbroken. The scent of freshly tarred wood and damp canvas filled the air, a familiar, comforting aroma. The men, their faces still bearing the grime and fatigue of their recent struggle, began to settle back into the routines of shipboard life. The Great Barrier Reef had tested them, but it had also revealed their mettle, leaving them with a profound respect for the sea and a deeper understanding of their own capabilities. The lingering taste of salt was on their lips as the Endeavour sailed onward, the newly charted coastline a testament to their perilous journey. The sun's bright glare made them pause, wiping sweat from their brows as they began the painstaking work of setting up the instruments. Here, on the shores of this distant island, the task felt monumental. Each carefully placed leg of the tripod a small victory against the vastness of the unknown. They carried delicate lenses and metal tubes, tools designed to capture the fleeting dance of celestial bodies, a science demanding absolute precision. The astronomers, a mix of seasoned navigators and eager scholars, moved with a shared purpose, their hushed voices a stark contrast to the lapping waves. They sought to witness the transit of Venus, a rare alignment where the planet would appear as a dark spot crossing the face of the sun, an event that would help them measure the true distance between Earth and the sun, a puzzle that had long vexed thinkers back home. This meticulous preparation, an endeavor requiring immense patience, underscored the mission's scientific heart. Underneath the unfamiliar sky, the air carried the scent of unfamiliar blossoms, a sweet perfume that mingled with the briny tang of the sea. As they worked, they talked of calculations and corrections, their minds focused on the precise moment the celestial event would begin, their gaze often drifting towards the horizon, as if expecting the planet to appear from beyond the sea. This shared anticipation bound them together. One of the younger men, named David, carefully adjusted the finely crafted telescope, its brass gleaming. He squinted, trying to shield his eyes from the brightness as he checked the alignment, his brow furrowed in concentration. He had heard stories from his tutors about the importance of this observation, how it could unlock secrets of the cosmos, and the weight of that responsibility settled upon his young shoulders with each successful adjustment. Meanwhile, the ship's surgeon, a practical man named John, observed their efforts with a mixture of admiration and concern for their well-being. He saw how the intense daylight made their eyes water and how they sought the scant patches of shade cast by the ship's sails. He prepared cooling drinks and made sure they had water, understanding that even the most brilliant minds faltered without basic comforts. He also felt a pang of sympathy for the islanders who watched from a distance, their faces a blend of curiosity and perhaps bewilderment. They brought gifts of ripe fruit, their movements fluid and graceful, a silent offering that softened the edges of the newcomers' focused intensity. These exchanges, though brief, spoke volumes of the mutual regard they were slowly building. A seasoned navigator, Captain Cook himself, approached the astronomers, his gaze sharp and assessing. He spoke quietly with them, his words carrying the authority of command, discussing the timing of their observations and ensuring their safety. His presence was a steady anchor, a reminder that while the celestial world was their focus, the earthly realm and its potential dangers demanded constant vigilance. He expressed his hope that their instruments would survive the journey, noting that many early attempts had been hampered by faulty equipment or unpredictable weather. The successful construction and calibration of these complex devices before leaving England had been a significant undertaking, a testament to the growing understanding of optics and mechanics. He understood the value of what they were attempting. One of the scientists, a man with a wispy beard named Mr. Wilkes, eagerly described the intricate clockwork mechanisms that powered some of their devices, explaining how they were designed to track the subtle movements of the stars. He spoke of the challenges of keeping such delicate instruments in perfect working order, especially with the constant motion of the ship and the varied climates they had traversed. This required constant attention and repair. He then showed David a small polished metal disc, explaining its purpose. This was a sea level, a tool designed to ensure their horizontal measurements were true, even on a gently rolling deck or uneven ground. David turned it over in his hands, marveling at its smooth surface and the intricate markings etched into it, a small object of great importance. He wondered if such refined tools existed in every society, or if they were unique to his world. As the day progressed, the gathering heat made the air shimmer above the sandy ground. David felt his skin grow warm, and he adjusted his linen shirt, pulling it away from his neck to catch a faint breeze. He focused again on the eyepiece, his world narrowing to the sun and the anticipated arrival of Venus, a tiny pinpoint of light still unseen but eagerly awaited. The ship's cook, a jovial man known for his elaborate sea shanties, brought out freshly baked bread, its aroma a welcome change from the salty air. He winked at the astronomers, telling them, "Don't forget to count the stars you find while you're looking for that little lady." The lightheartedness was a welcome distraction, a brief moment of levity before the critical observation began, a testament to the crew's ability to find joy amidst their demanding tasks. He remembered a similar moment of anticipation on the previous voyage, when they had searched for a passage through the southern seas, facing biting winds and treacherous ice. Those memories of enduring hardships together made this scientific endeavor feel less daunting, more like another challenge they were well equipped to meet. They had learned much about resilience. Yet, as the sun climbed higher, a faint unease settled in. The transit was meant to begin soon, according to their calculations, and the sky remained a brilliant, unbroken blue. A quiet murmur passed through the assembled group, a shared question hanging unspoken in the air. Had they miscalculated, or was the planet yet to show itself? This uncertainty, a familiar companion on any voyage of discovery, tested their resolve. In these quiet moments of waiting, David could almost forget the vast ocean surrounding them and the weight of the scientific endeavor pressing down. The salty tang of the sea air had always been a familiar companion, but as the Endeavour anchored in the tranquil waters of Botany Bay, a different scent mingled with it, the faint, earthy perfume of wood smoke and unfamiliar blossoms. A sense of quiet anticipation settled over the crew as they prepared to make landfall, their weeks at sea punctuated by the endless rhythm of the waves. For weeks, their world had been a confined expanse of wooden decks and canvas sails, a familiar universe, yet one that felt increasingly distant with each league sailed. Now, as boats were lowered and oars dipped into the shimmering water, a different horizon beckoned, one populated by figures moving with a grace that spoke of a deep connection to the land. From the ship's railing, The coastal dwellers appeared as silhouettes against the verdant backdrop, their movements fluid and unhurried. Some stood near the water's edge, their expressions unreadable from this distance, while others moved further inland, disappearing into the dense green foliage that hugged the shoreline. The Europeans watched with a mixture of awe and caution, their own familiar tools and customs feeling somewhat out of place against the raw, untamed beauty of this new territory. They had spent weeks meticulously documenting coastlines and currents, each sounding a step closer to charting the unknown, but the people themselves remained a profound mystery, their existence a testament to lives lived in ways entirely apart from their own. As the first boats nudged the sandy shore, a hushed reverence fell over the assembled crew. The indigenous Australians who had gathered did not approach immediately, their gazes steady and observant. The Europeans, in turn, offered gestures of peace, extending simple objects, a brightly colored bead, a piece of cloth, in hopes of conveying their non-hostile intentions. For a long moment, there was only the gentle lap of water against the sand and the distant cries of unseen birds, a fragile stillness that held the weight of an unprecedented encounter. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first tentative bridge across the vast cultural divide. One of the coastal dwellers, a man whose presence commanded a quiet authority, eventually stepped forward. He carried a long wooden spear, but held it loosely, his posture more curious than aggressive. He spoke in a language that was entirely alien, a melodic series of sounds that conveyed no meaning to the newcomers, yet his calm demeanor offered a silent invitation. Observing him, the sailors saw a profound understanding of his environment, reflected in his confident stride and the way he seemed to scan the trees and the sea with equal attention, a stark contrast to the sailors' reliance on instruments and maps. The exchange of gifts began slowly, a tentative dance of offering and acceptance. When a small mirror was presented, the reactions were a fascinating study in unfamiliarity. One man gazed into it, his brow furrowed in bewilderment at the reflection staring back, as if encountering a spirit captured from another realm. Another simply turned it over, examining the smooth, polished surface as if it were an artifact of unknown purpose, its ability to reveal one's own face, a concept yet to be grasped. These small moments of incomprehension underscored the immense distance between their worlds, each interaction a subtle lesson in the vastness of human experience. The Europeans, in turn, observed the intricate skills of the people around them. They watched as men adeptly threw wooden spears with remarkable accuracy, striking small birds flitting through the undergrowth with ease, or as women gathered roots and herbs, their knowledge of the local flora clearly extensive. The ease with which they moved through the dense bush, their intimate familiarity with its resources, spoke of generations of living in harmony with this land. This deep-seated connection to the earth, so different from the Europeans' reliance on the sea and manufactured goods, offered a glimpse into a way of life shaped by its immediate surroundings. As the day wore on, the initial reserve began to soften, replaced by a shared curiosity. Laughter, though not understood, carried across the small distance, a testament to the universal nature of amusement. Children, bolder than their elders, crept closer, their wide eyes taking in the strange attire and equipment of the visitors. Through gestures and shared actions, a rudimentary form of communication began to form, a silent language built on mutual observation and a shared sense of wonder at the world unfolding before them. The fragile threads of connection were being spun, not through shared words, but through the simple act of being present together. Yet beneath the surface of these nascent interactions, a subtle unease lingered for the newcomers. They saw how the coastal dwellers moved in distinct groups, their social order evident in the way they deferred to certain individuals, their customs deeply ingrained. The Europeans, accustomed to a more hierarchical and overt structure in their own naval service, found themselves constantly attempting to interpret these subtle social cues. They wondered if their own actions, their very presence, were inadvertently disrupting a long-established balance, if their unfamiliarity with these unspoken rules would inevitably lead to unintended friction. For the people of this land, the arrival of the ships must have been an event of profound significance, an interruption to the timeless rhythm of their existence. Their cautious observation, their measured response to the newcomers, spoke of a deep wisdom, an understanding that the world held both wonder and potential peril. The Europeans, focused on charting and documenting, sometimes missed the subtle signs, the unspoken communication that passed between the indigenous Australians, the quiet exchanges that revealed a complex society woven from ancient traditions and a profound respect for their homeland. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the bay, the Europeans prepared to return to their ship, leaving behind a scattering of gifts and a wealth of unanswered questions. The coastal dwellers, too, began to disperse, melting back into the landscape as if they were a part of it. The silence that returned to the bay felt different now, no longer simply an absence of sound, but a space filled with the memory of a shared day, of tentative connections forged across an immense cultural chasm, and the quiet understanding that the world had just grown a little larger for both sides. The knowledge of these people, their ways of living and understanding the world, had begun to weave itself into the crew's shared experience.
A lingering question for those who had witnessed this first contact, and indeed for those who would later study it, was how such profound differences in worldview and custom could ever truly be reconciled. The cautious interactions of that day had laid the groundwork for future understanding, yet the sheer depth of the cultural divide remained a significant presence. The vastness of the Pacific stretched out, an endless canvas of blue that had become both familiar and oppressive. For weeks, the ship's resolution and adventure had sailed onward, a slow crawl across the water under skies that offered little respite from the endless expanse. The sailors, hardened by months at sea, found their spirits tested by the unending sameness. Days bled into one another, marked by the creak of timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, and the repetitive calls of the watch. Even the food, a monotonous diet of salted meat and hard biscuit, offered no comfort, becoming a source of quiet grumbling amongst the crew. The officers, too, felt the strain, though their duties kept them occupied. Captain Cook, ever watchful, paced the deck, his gaze sweeping the horizon with an unyielding intensity. He knew that to keep the men focused, a sense of purpose had to be maintained, a belief in the value of their immense undertaking. Preventing the debilitating sickness that could ravage a crew on such prolonged voyages was a constant preoccupation. Efforts were made to ensure the men ate what little fresh provisions they could acquire, and strict cleanliness was enforced as best as the ship's conditions allowed. Yet the longing for solid ground, for the familiar scents and sounds of land, gnawed at many a sailor. They had recently sailed through waters where the air carried the crisp, clean tang of distant ice, a stark contrast to the warmer climes they had left behind. This journey, a grand circumnavigation of the globe, aimed at settling the question of a vast southern continent, a land many believed must exist to balance the northern hemisphere. The hope of discovery fueled many a conversation, yet the sheer scale of their task weighed heavily. Imagine for a moment the sheer audacity of it, traversing oceans with only the stars and finely crafted instruments to guide them, seeking lands no European eye had ever beheld.
The crews, accustomed to the routines of naval life, found the monotony of this particular voyage a unique challenge. Unlike the urgent business of war or the focused charting of known coastlines, this was a venture into the unknown, a patient, relentless pursuit of a theoretical landmass. Conversations often turned to home, to families and friends left behind, their lives continuing while the sailors were adrift in a world of water and sky. Even the most robust seamen confessed to moments of profound loneliness, staring out at the seemingly infinite horizon, a tiny speck against nature's immensity. One blustery afternoon, as the Resolution pitched and rolled, a sudden gust of wind ripped a sail, sending men scrambling to secure it. The quick, efficient movements of the crew, each knowing their role, were a testament to years of training. A young cabin boy, his face pale, nearly lost his footing, but was steadied by a gruff but kindly boatswain. This small incident, a mere ripple in the vast ocean of their journey, served as a stark reminder of the constant vigilance required at sea. A moment's carelessness could have dire consequences, a truth etched into the minds of every soul aboard. The daily rituals aboard the Resolution provided a semblance of order to the vastness. Mornings began with the call to quarters, followed by the diligent tasks of sail trimming, deck swabbing, and navigation checks. The scientists, their instruments carefully protected, would often be seen on deck, meticulously recording atmospheric conditions and celestial movements. Their quiet dedication, their pursuit of knowledge in this immense, often unforgiving environment was a source of quiet admiration. Their focus on the precise angles of the sun or the slightest shift in wind direction offered a different kind of purpose to the journey. Cook, observing the crew's quiet anxieties, understood the need for something to break the monotony. He often shared anecdotes of his earlier surveying days, tales of navigating the treacherous waters of Newfoundland, painting pictures of challenging but ultimately rewarding work. He encouraged the men to take pride in their ship, in the meticulous way the Adventure, their companion vessel, sailed alongside them, a beacon of shared purpose. He knew that a shared history, even in its making, could bind a crew together against the isolating nature of their endeavor. Yet the ocean offered its own stark lessons. One evening, as the twin ships moved through a particularly calm stretch of sea, the water turned an unusual, milky hue. It was a phenomenon few had ever witnessed, a visual puzzle that sparked both curiosity and a degree of unease. The scientists, their faces illuminated by lantern light, gathered to discuss its cause, their voices a murmur against the gentle lapping of waves. This was the kind of mystery that fueled their explorations, the small moments of wonder that made the immense effort feel worthwhile, even when the grand prize remained elusive. The diet remained a constant challenge, a dull ache in the belly that no amount of salted beef could truly satisfy. Cook had made efforts to include citrus fruits and sauerkraut whenever possible, recognizing their value in warding off the dreaded scurvy that had plagued earlier voyages. But these supplies were finite, and the vast ocean offered little opportunity for replenishment. The thought of a freshly baked loaf of bread, still warm from the oven, or the sharp sweetness of an apple became a powerful, almost unbearable longing. The question of the southern continent remained a tantalizing yet frustrating mystery. Had they sailed close? Had they missed it entirely? The charts they meticulously updated each day showed only endless ocean, currents, and the occasional island. Cook himself, poring over the maps in his cabin, would trace the lines, his brow furrowed in concentration. The knowledge that continents existed, solid and defined, made the absence of this fabled southern land even more perplexing. The sheer scale of the world, so much larger than any single lifetime could truly comprehend, became increasingly apparent with each passing week. The sailors spoke of the stars with a new intimacy. Without the familiar constellations of home, they learned the patterns of the southern sky, naming them and finding comfort in their predictable movements. The Southern Cross became a familiar guide, its steady light a constant presence against the velvet darkness. They shared stories of the constellations they knew from home, weaving tales of heroes and gods under skies that felt both alien and strangely familiar. This shared experience of charting new celestial territory bound them together.
The shared challenge of maintaining discipline and morale aboard two vessels on such a monumental journey was a complex undertaking. Cook's leadership was tested not by overt rebellion, but by the quiet erosion of spirit that prolonged isolation could bring. He relied on his officers to foster a sense of camaraderie, to encourage friendly competition in tasks, and to ensure that even the smallest successes were acknowledged. The communal singing of sea shanties during evening watch, their voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the ship, provided a fleeting but potent connection. As the Resolution sailed on, each day a new page turned in the book of their journey. The crew found a peculiar resilience growing within them. The vastness of the Pacific, once a source of dread, began to shape their understanding of the world and their place within it. They were no longer just sailors, they were explorers, witnessing sights and experiencing conditions that few others ever would, their lives unfolding against a backdrop of unparalleled natural grandeur. As the ship's carpenter worked to mend a worn spar, the rhythmic tap of his hammer provided a steady beat against the vast silence of the ocean. The icy winds, sharp and relentless, bit at exposed skin, a constant reminder of the unforgiving expanse of the Southern Ocean. Men huddled close, their breath pluming white in the frigid air, their faces etched with weariness. The ship, the Resolution, groaned beneath the strain, timbers creaking like ancient bones as it navigated through waters choked with ice, a stark contrast to the warmer climes they had recently left. This relentless push southward was driven by a singular, almost desperate hope, the belief that a vast, unknown continent lay hidden beyond this frozen frontier. Days blurred into a pattern of watchful vigilance, each sunrise painting the ice-laden sky with hues of gray and pale blue. The sailors, their hands stiff with cold, performed their duties with a quiet efficiency, their movements economical, conserving precious warmth. They had sailed farther into this frozen realm than anyone from their homeland had ever dared, a testament to the steadfast resolve of their commander, who himself spent hours on deck, his eyes scanning the horizon with an unyielding gaze. He spoke often of the importance of charting these desolate waters, of understanding the world's shape. The crew's faces, when they could be seen beneath woolen caps and scarves, reflected a mixture of awe and apprehension as they witnessed the immense, silent power of the ice. Mountains of frozen water, impossibly large and ancient, drifted past the ship, some glowing with an ethereal blue light from within. The constant, muffled scraping of smaller ice fragments against the hull sent shivers through the timbers, a sound that grew more frequent as they ventured deeper into the treacherous seas. Survival here demanded a vigilance that stretched every nerve. This unforgiving environment tested the crew in ways the warmer, more temperate waters never had. The food, though carefully managed to prevent the return of the debilitating scurvy, offered little comfort against the gnawing cold. The men found themselves relying on each other for warmth and companionship, their shared ordeal forging a bond stronger than any ordinary camaraderie. Even the scientists, usually absorbed in their instruments and specimens, spoke in hushed tones, awed by the sheer raw power of this place. Then came the moment when the ship found itself boxed in, a vast wall of ice closing off their passage, the sky above a uniform, unbroken white. A palpable tension settled over the vessel. Officers consulted charts, their voices low, discussing potential avenues of escape, while below decks, the sailors shared anxious glances, their minds conjuring images of being trapped indefinitely in this desolate waste. The sea, usually a source of sustenance and passage, now felt like a vast, frozen cage. The very air seemed to possess a chilling touch, each breath drawing into the lungs feeling sharp and clean, yet it carried a profound emptiness. The sailors found themselves speaking less, their energy focused on the immediate needs of warmth and preparedness. They wrapped themselves in extra layers of wool and canvas, the rough textures of familiar comfort against the biting cold. Their gaze often drifted to the distant, shimmering bands of light that sometimes appeared in the night sky, a silent, celestial spectacle in the immense darkness. Through all this, the commander's determination remained a constant, a guiding force that propelled them onward. He would direct the crew to take careful measurements of the ice, the water temperature, the very currents that tugged at the ship, all with a precision that spoke of his deep respect for the natural world, even in its most formidable state. He seemed to understand that even in these barren expanses, knowledge could be found, and that mapping these remote regions was as vital as charting any previously unknown coastline. The crew, witnessing this relentless pursuit, felt a sense of purpose, even amidst their discomfort. They were part of something grander, pushing the boundaries of what was known, venturing where few had even dreamed of going. The thought of returning home with tales of these frozen seas, of the great ice mountains, and the chilling, clear air was a powerful motivator. They understood their commander's drive, his need to understand the world in its entirety. There were moments, too, when the overwhelming silence of the polar expanse seemed to press down, broken only by the cry of a distant seabird or the groaning of the ice. This profound quietude was something few had experienced before, a stark contrast to the bustling ports and familiar sounds of their homeland. It fostered an introspective mood, leading many to consider their own place in the vastness of the world and the sheer audacity of their endeavor. The scientific minds aboard the ship found much to document, even in this seemingly barren landscape. They noted the hardy lichens clinging to exposed rocks, the seals that occasionally broke the surface of the frigid water, and the unique atmospheric phenomena that painted the sky with such otherworldly beauty. Each observation, however small, was meticulously recorded, destined for the learned societies back in London, adding another layer to humanity's understanding of the planet's diverse environments. As they finally turned the ship northward, leaving the deepest reaches of the southern ice behind, a collective sigh of relief swept through the crew. They had faced the edge of a world few had ever seen, and emerged battered but undeterred. The experience had been arduous, a trial of endurance and resolve, yet it had also offered a profound glimpse into the planet's raw power and the indomitable spirit of those who sought to explore its furthest corners. The memory of the biting cold and the towering ice would linger, a testament to the challenges of their mission. Yet the commander's focus had already shifted, his gaze now fixed on the next horizon, the next charted course. The world, he believed, was still full of places waiting to be understood, and their journey was far from over. Life aboard the Resolution in the shadow of the ice had left its mark, but the great ocean beckoned, and a new chapter of discovery awaited. This section charted the punishing extremes of the southern polar waters and the crew's struggle for survival amidst vast ice formations, highlighting Cook's persistent drive for exploration in the face of severe environmental challenges. The salt spray, though familiar from his earlier voyages, carried a new tang, a sweetness mingled with the sea's brine that spoke of lands untouched by the harsh winds of northern seas. As the Resolution sailed through waters that shimmered with an impossible blue, a sense of expectation settled over the crew, a palpable shift from the biting cold of the south. They had journeyed across the vast, empty canvas of the Southern Ocean, and now, like painters finally finding their pigments, they approached islands bursting with vibrant hues. The sails snapped with a renewed vigor, and the men, their faces etched with the memory of ice and fog, strained their eyes towards the distant verdant shapes that began to materialize on the horizon. They anchored first near an island, known to its people as Tahiti, a place where the very air seemed alive with the scent of unfamiliar blossoms, a fragrance that clung to the damp wood of the ship and tickled the nostrils with its potent sweetness. The crew watched, a mixture of awe and apprehension swirling within them, as canoes carved from single enormous logs glided across the lagoon, their occupants adorned with flowers and vibrant fabrics woven from plant fibers. These islanders, with their easy smiles and fluid movements, moved with a grace that spoke of lives lived in harmony with the rhythm of the waves and the bounty of the land, a stark contrast to the disciplined, often grim, existence aboard the Resolution.
The process of charting began with the meticulous work of surveying the coastline, a task that required careful navigation around shallow reefs that lay like jagged teeth just beneath the shimmering surface. Cook himself, his brow furrowed in concentration, spent hours bent over his charts, measuring distances and angles with instruments that seemed impossibly delicate against the backdrop of raw, untamed nature. The sailors, too, found new tasks, some exchanging small metal tools and brightly colored cloth for the islanders' plentiful fruits, sweet, juicy mangoes and creamy breadfruit, while others were tasked with observing the local fishing techniques, noting the ingenious use of woven nets and spears. It became apparent that these islanders possessed a profound understanding of the sea, an innate knowledge passed down through generations, which the Europeans found both fascinating and humbling. They watched, mesmerized, as certain islanders navigated their canoes across vast distances, seemingly by reading the subtle shifts in the ocean's currents and the patterns of the stars that wheeled overhead with an accuracy that rivaled any sextant. This intuitive mastery of the waves, a skill honed not by calculation, but by deep communal experience, presented a navigational challenge of a different sort, one that required a different kind of observation and a willingness to learn from those whose world was so alien to their own. As the Resolution moved from Tahiti to other islands, the crew encountered a mosaic of cultures, each with its own distinct customs and traditions. They sailed towards the Society Islands, observing the intricate social structures and the elaborate ceremonies that marked daily life. The people there seemed to possess a remarkable artistry, evident in the finely crafted wooden bowls and the intricate tattoos that adorned their skin, each marking a story of lineage and accomplishment. The interactions, though often marked by the language barrier, were generally friendly, filled with exchanges of goods and shared moments of curiosity. Yet, the charting of so many small, scattered islands also presented its own set of navigational difficulties, a constant puzzle of position and measurement. The sheer number of uncharted coves and bays, each requiring detailed survey work, meant that the surveyors were perpetually busy, their hands often stained with ink and their eyes weary from scrutinizing the horizon. There were moments of doubt, whispered conversations among the officers about whether they were truly capturing the essence of these diverse lands or merely sketching their outlines, a concern that perhaps their maps would not fully convey the richness of the human and natural worlds they were encountering. The crew's interactions with the various Polynesian communities revealed a spectrum of responses to their arrival.
Some islanders offered their hospitality with open arms, sharing their food and their stories, while others remained more reserved, observing the visitors from a distance, their expressions hinting at a cautious appraisal of these strangers from across the vast ocean. This variability in reception meant that each new landfall required a delicate approach, a careful assessment of the local customs, and a respectful engagement that sought to build understanding rather than impose authority, a constant dance of diplomacy played out on foreign shores. This period of exploration also brought into sharp focus the different ways of life and the varying understandings of ownership and resource management. The islanders, accustomed to abundant natural resources that seemed to replenish themselves, often struggled to comprehend the European concept of claiming land or controlling access to specific goods. These differing perspectives, though not always leading to immediate conflict, created subtle tensions, a quiet undercurrent of misunderstanding that underscored the vast cultural chasm between the two worlds now brought into close contact by the relentless pursuit of knowledge. Amidst the scientific observations and the charting of new territories, there were also the simple human moments that lightened the arduous nature of the voyage. One afternoon, while anchored near a particularly lush island, a group of sailors, having finished their day's work, sat on the shore, their laughter mingling with the gentle lapping of waves as they shared stories and attempted to mimic the fluid, melodious songs of the islanders. It was a small respite, a reminder of the shared humanity that could bridge even the widest cultural divides, a moment of quiet camaraderie under a sky filled with stars that had guided generations of Polynesian sailors.
As the ships prepared to depart, the memory of these islands, with their vibrant cultures and their deep connection to the sea, remained etched in the minds of the men. The knowledge gained, the carefully drawn charts, and the detailed notes on flora and fauna represented a significant expansion of the world's understanding, a testament to the enduring spirit of exploration. The vast Pacific, once a sea of myth and speculation, was slowly yielding its secrets. Each island charted, adding another piece to the ever-growing puzzle of the globe, forever altering the way people viewed the distant horizons. With the dawn of a new day, the sails were trimmed, and the Resolution turned its prow towards the open sea, carrying with it the indelible impressions of these azure isles. The biting wind whipped across the deck, carrying the tang of salt and something colder, something that spoke of distances yet unmeasured. A chill had settled deep into the bones of the crew aboard the Resolution, a familiar companion since they'd last seen the friendly shores of the Pacific Isles. Now the gray expanse of the Northern Ocean stretched before them, vast and indifferent, a stark contrast to the verdant warmth they had left behind. This new undertaking, the search for a fabled passage connecting the great oceans, felt like a step into the unknown, a gamble born of maps sketched from whispers and educated guesses. The very air seemed to carry a questioning weight, a subtle challenge to their purpose and their resolve. The captain, a man whose keen eyes seemed to miss nothing, stood at the helm, his gaze fixed on the horizon, as if willing a new continent to appear. Around him, the officers consulted charts, their fingers tracing lines that represented little more than hope and speculation. They spoke in hushed tones of currents that defied understanding, and of coastlines that appeared and vanished with the shifting mists. Each conversation a delicate dance between the need for scientific certainty and the stark reality of the uncharted. The weight of this pursuit pressed upon them, a constant reminder that their charts, so meticulously drawn in warmer climes, might prove useless in these frigid, deceptive waters.
Navigating these waters required a different kind of sight, one that looked beyond the immediate visibility to the unseen forces at play.
The sailors, accustomed to the predictable winds of the tropics, now wrestled with unpredictable gusts that could fill a sail one moment and leave it limp the next. Their familiar tools, the sextant and the compass, still served, but the very land they sought was a phantom, its existence debated by learned men back home. One could feel the underlying uncertainty among the officers. Were they truly on the cusp of a monumental discovery, or were they chasing a dream that would only lead them further into the vast emptiness of the north? Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of gray skies and churning waves, punctuated by the gruff commands of the watch and the rhythmic creak of the timbers. The crew, hardened by their previous voyages, found their resolve tested by the sheer, unyielding sameness of their surroundings. They huddled together on deck, their breath misting in the cool air, as they scanned the endless sea for any sign that their efforts were not in vain. The hope of discovering a navigable route, a waterway that would change the world's understanding of its geography, was the fuel that kept them moving forward, a shared ambition that bound them together despite the gnawing doubt. The initial optimism of setting sail from familiar ports had long since faded, replaced by a quiet determination. This quest for a northwest passage felt different from charting known coastlines. It was a hunt for a ghost, a rumored connection that had eluded explorers for generations. The captain had spoken of it with a compelling blend of scientific inquiry and sheer will, and the crew followed, their trust in his judgment a powerful force against the growing weariness. Yet whispers could be heard on deck, quiet conversations between sailors about the immense challenges, the sheer impossibility of what they sought. As they pushed further north, the landscape itself seemed to conspire against them, presenting a series of impassable barriers. Great masses of ice, jagged and formidable, drifted silently in their path, forcing them to alter course repeatedly. The coastline, when it appeared through the swirling fog, was often rugged and broken, offering no hint of a passage through. The navigators meticulously recorded every detail, every inlet that proved to be a dead end, every bay that revealed only solid land stretching further than the eye could see. This painstaking work, while essential, also served to underscore the immense difficulty of their undertaking. The crew's conversations often turned to the practicalities of survival, as the unfamiliar cold seeped into their very being. They found themselves constantly adjusting their gear, pulling woolens tighter around their necks and hands. The diet, though carefully managed to prevent the debilitating scurvy that had plagued earlier voyages, was becoming a source of quiet grumbling. The monotonous fare, meant to sustain them, could not quite fill the void left by the desire for fresh, varied foods, a comfort that seemed a world away. They learned to appreciate the small comforts, a warm drink below deck, a moment of shared laughter amidst the harsh conditions. When they finally encountered the communities of the Arctic coast, a new understanding began to dawn. These were people who had mastered their environment, their lives woven intricately with the rhythm of the ice and the sea. The sailors watched, often with a mixture of awe and bewilderment, as the Inuit people went about their daily lives. They saw ingenious methods of hunting, crafts made from bone and skin that provided warmth and shelter, and a deep knowledge of the local creatures. These encounters offered a glimpse into a different way of knowing, a profound connection to the land that the Europeans, for all their advanced instruments, could only observe. The exchanges were often a silent testament to the shared human experience of surviving in challenging climes. The Inuit offered furs, expertly prepared to ward off the extreme cold, and the sailors, in turn, offered metal tools and beads, objects of wonder to the coastal dwellers. There were attempts at communication, a mixture of gestures and sounds, where each side tried to convey its intentions and learn about the other. The Europeans, particularly the scientific minds aboard, were fascinated by the Inuits' understanding of their surroundings, their ability to read the subtle signs of the weather and the movements of animals. This journey, however, was not yielding the clear path they had hoped for, the straightforward waterway that would link the oceans. Instead, they were met with a labyrinth of fjords, islands, and vast expanses of ice, a geography that seemed to deliberately obstruct their progress. The authority of the captain remained, unwavering in his pursuit, but the weight of repeated disappointment was a palpable force among the crew. Each dead end, each impassable barrier of ice chipped away at the initial certainty, leaving behind a growing sense of weariness and the quiet question of how much further they could truly push against the unyielding north. As the season turned and the threat of being trapped by the encroaching ice grew more severe, a decision had to be made. The goal, the Northwest Passage, remained elusive, a whisper on the wind rather than a charted course. The immense effort, the risks taken, the resources expended had not yet yielded the definitive proof. The experience left the crew with a profound respect for the immensity of the world and the limits of their current knowledge. What paths might lie hidden, waiting for a future, perhaps different approach? The great frozen north guarded its secrets closely, and the echoes of its silence resonated deeply within them. The vastness of the world, it seemed, held many more unknowns than they had ever imagined. Their own skills, honed in warmer seas and on more predictable coasts, were tested and stretched here, in a land that operated by its own ancient rules. The camaraderie that had seen them through previous trials now faced a different kind of strain, the subtle erosion of hope against the backdrop of relentless natural forces. The enduring, quiet strength of the people they met here, those who lived in harmony with this seemingly harsh environment, offered a different perspective on resilience, a testament to the varied ways life adapts and thrives across the globe. The understanding of what it meant to navigate and to survive was subtly, irrevocably shifting. The memory of the lands they had charted, the peoples they had met, and the scientific marvels they had documented all now seemed to exist alongside the stark reality of this northern wilderness. The question of purpose, of the true meaning behind their relentless charting, lingered in the minds of many. Were they merely mapping the world for others to follow, or was there a deeper understanding to be gleaned from simply experiencing these diverse landscapes and cultures? The silent majesty of the ice, the quiet resilience of the Arctic peoples, and the enduring challenge of the unknown left an imprint, a quiet understanding that the world was far larger and far more complex than any single voyage could ever fully reveal. The bite of the Arctic wind was a constant companion, chilling to the bone even through layers of thick wool. The sailors aboard the Resolution moved with a practiced slowness, their breath plumbing in the frigid air as they tended to the ship's duties. They had sailed north, pushing further into waters charted only by the faintest of whispers and the most hopeful of imaginations, seeking a passage that seemed to vanish with every mile gained. While the vastness of the ocean stretched endlessly around them, their focus narrowed to the immediate tasks required to survive another day in this harsh, unforgiving realm. As the ship navigated the icy waters, the crew observed the remarkable ingenuity of the Inuit people who called this region home. They watched from a respectful distance as families skillfully launched their sleek sealskin kayaks, gliding silently over the water with an ease that belied the choppy conditions. The islanders moved with a profound understanding of their surroundings, their clothing fashioned from animal hides, providing a warmth and protection that the sailors' own heavy coats struggled to match. This silent observation forged a connection, a recognition of shared vulnerability in the face of an overwhelming environment. During one such observation, a group of sailors noticed how an Inuit hunter, having successfully brought down a seal, meticulously used a sharp stone tool to prepare the animal. The hunter's movements were economical and precise, each cut serving a purpose in the efficient use of every part of the creature. This efficiency sparked a quiet admiration among the onlookers, who themselves relied on the ship's stores and the increasingly monotonous diet of salted meat and hard biscuits. They found themselves wondering if their own reliance on manufactured goods had perhaps diminished their own practical skills. The crew of the Resolution then spent a period in a sheltered inlet, a temporary respite from the open sea that allowed for more direct, albeit still cautious, interaction. Here, they witnessed firsthand the construction of an igloo, or snow house, a testament to the Inuits' mastery of their environment. The rapid assembly of these sturdy, insulated shelters, using blocks of packed snow cut with remarkable precision, filled the sailors with a sense of wonder. They understood the vital role such structures played in providing refuge from the extreme cold, a stark contrast to their own comparatively vulnerable wooden hull. One particular exchange involved the sharing of dried fish. An elder Inuit, his face etched with the wisdom of many seasons, offered a portion of their catch to the ship's boatswain, who in turn presented him with a sturdy metal knife. The fisherman examined the knife with keen interest, testing its edge on a piece of wood with a satisfied nod, while the sailors savored the intensely salty, slightly chewy texture of the fish, so different from their usual fare. This simple transaction, conducted with gestures and shared smiles, felt like a bridge built across a vast divide of experience and language. The scholars accompanying the voyage also found much to document, their attention drawn to the intricate knowledge of the local flora and fauna. They observed how the islanders identified plants that could be used for medicinal purposes or as food supplements, knowledge passed down through generations. One of the botanists, a man named Joseph Banks, expressed his amazement at their ability to find sustenance and remedies in what appeared to be a barren, frozen landscape. He diligently sketched the plants the islanders indicated, his own understanding of the natural world expanding with each new discovery. Meanwhile, a more pressing concern for Cook and his officers revolved around the persistent search for the fabled Northwest Passage. The maps they possessed were incomplete, mere suggestions of what might lie beyond the charted waters, and the icy barriers they encountered seemed to mock their efforts. This pursuit often led to lengthy discussions among the officers, debating the merits of one narrow inlet over another, each decision carrying the weight of the expedition's purpose and the crew's safety. The faint hope of discovery warred with the growing realization of the immense challenges. During a period of calm, a few of the more adventurous sailors ventured ashore, their boots crunching on the frozen earth. They found small carved figures made of bone or ivory, depicting animals and human forms, left at what appeared to be significant sites. These artifacts, delicate and imbued with a sense of purpose, spoke of a rich cultural life and a deep spiritual connection to the land that resonated with the sailors' own underlying sense of awe. They handled these objects with care, a silent acknowledgement of the world that existed beyond their own immediate experience. One afternoon, while examining a collection of Inuit tools, one of the ship's carpenters noticed the distinctive way they had been fashioned, particularly the sharp, durable edges of their cutting implements. He spent a good part of the day comparing them to his own set of steel tools, marveling at how the islanders achieved such effectiveness with simpler materials and techniques. He mused aloud, "Remarkable, how much can be done with such simple means if one knows the land well enough." This appreciation for their skill was a recurring theme among the men who spent time observing their hosts. The scientific goal of the expedition extended beyond mapping. It also aimed to observe astronomical phenomena. As the ship lay anchored, a keen-eyed astronomer noticed the remarkable clarity of the night sky, unburdened by the hazy atmosphere of more southern climes. He spoke excitedly about the precise angles of the stars, offering an unparalleled opportunity for accurate celestial measurements that would refine their understanding of longitude. This scientific pursuit, the meticulous gathering of data, was a constant undercurrent to the daily struggle for survival and exploration. However, the vastness of the Arctic also presented an ongoing challenge to community solidarity within the crew. The prolonged periods of isolation, coupled with the constant threat of the elements and the uncertain progress of their mission, began to wear on the men. Disagreements occasionally flared over rationing or duties, minor sparks in the oppressive quiet that required careful management by the officers. Cook himself was often seen poring over his logs and charts, his brow furrowed with the immense responsibility of guiding his men through such a demanding undertaking. A gentle joke shared between two sailors as they secured a mooring line brought a brief moment of levity. "If we find this passage, I'm demanding a week's leave to feel ground that doesn't crunch underfoot." The shared laughter, though quiet, was a welcome sound against the vast silence. This camaraderie, the ability to find humor in adversity, was essential for maintaining spirits. They understood that their collective effort, their reliance on one another, was as crucial as any navigational tool in their quest. The scholars also debated the nature of the Inuit social structures, with some suggesting a highly organized communal system based on shared resources, while others pointed to evidence of more localized family-based units. These differing interpretations highlighted how much remained unknown about the people they encountered, and how their own European perspectives might shape their understanding of these different ways of life. The ongoing nature of these scholarly discussions underscored the fact that knowledge was a fluid thing, constantly being refined by new observations and differing viewpoints. As the days shortened and the chill deepened, Cook made the difficult decision to turn the ship south. The passage remained elusive, hidden behind impenetrable walls of ice, and the approaching winter offered little hope of progress. The collective sigh of relief from the crew was palpable, a mix of disappointment at the failed quest, but also a profound gratitude for the chance to return to more familiar waters. The experiences gathered here, however, the understanding of a people so perfectly adapted to their environment, would remain a significant part of the expedition's findings. The decision to depart was made with a sense of both accomplishment and a touch of melancholy, leaving behind the stark beauty of the Arctic. In the growing twilight, the sailors prepared the Resolution for its southward journey, carrying the quiet respect for the Inuit and the enduring mystery of the northern seas into their rest. The sails of the Resolution and Discovery caught the unfamiliar trade winds, guiding them toward a cluster of islands rising like emerald jewels from the vast Pacific. For the men on board, accustomed to the monotonous blues and grays of the open ocean, the sight of lush green slopes dotted with the cheerful white of homes sent a ripple of anticipation through the ship. Generations of sailors had spoken of lands where life seemed to bloom effortlessly, and as the islands drew nearer, these whispers began to take on the shape of tangible reality, promising an abundance that seemed almost unreal after months of dried rations and limited fresh water.
As the ships anchored in the bay, the Kanaka Maoli, the indigenous people of these islands, gathered along the shore, their faces a mixture of awe and cautious curiosity. They had witnessed great birds of the sea before, but never vessels so large, their white wings extended so proudly. From their vantage point on the land, these newcomers appeared both powerful and strangely vulnerable, their skin pale and their clothing unlike anything seen in these warm climes. The air carried the scent of salt and something else, a foreign smell, perhaps from the materials that formed these floating structures, mingling with the familiar perfume of blooming flowers that drifted from the shore. On board, Cook and his officers observed the scene with keen interest, noting the organized manner in which the islanders moved, their traditional attire a vibrant contrast to the drab uniforms of the sailors. Children chased each other near the water's edge, their laughter carrying faintly across the water, while adults conversed in groups, their movements fluid and purposeful. The sheer density of the population and the evident care with which they tended their cultivated fields stretching up the hillsides spoke of a society well established, a stark contrast to the smaller, more scattered communities encountered on previous legs of the journey. The initial days were marked by a tentative exchange, a delicate dance of offering and acceptance. The Kanaka Maoli, generous in spirit, brought forth baskets laden with ripe fruits, melons so sweet they made the sailors' mouths water, and breadfruit that, when roasted, offered a satisfying starchy meal. In return, the Europeans presented their metal tools, small knives that gleamed in the sun, and beads that caught the light, items that brought curious smiles to the faces of the islanders, who examined them with a careful reverence, touching the smooth surfaces with respect. Cook, ever the observer, noted the intricate social fabric of this place, the clear distinctions in status among the people he met, marked by elaborate headdresses and ornate garments. He saw that certain areas seemed to be held in special regard, places where the islanders paused with bowed heads, a quiet devotion that spoke of deeply held beliefs. He wondered about the underlying structure of their governance, the unseen threads that bound this community together, and the ways in which their traditions shaped their daily lives, so different from the hierarchies he knew. The sailors, too, found themselves drawn into the rhythm of the islands, exploring the verdant valleys and the clear, cool streams that tumbled down the hills. They saw how the islanders managed their land with a skill honed by generations, cultivating taro in carefully irrigated patches and harvesting coconuts from soaring palms. The islanders' intimate knowledge of the natural world, their ability to draw sustenance from the land and sea with apparent ease, impressed many of the crew, who understood the constant labor required to coax a living from the soil back home. This period of amiable interaction, however, held within it the seeds of future misunderstanding, for the very generosity of the islanders was rooted in a different concept of ownership than that held by the visitors. What the Europeans saw as a gift to be taken, the islanders might have considered a loan, an offering to be reciprocated in time and manner of their own choosing, leading to confusion when expectations did not align. The sailors often found themselves struggling to grasp the nuances of these interactions, caught between their orders to gather supplies and the subtle cues that signaled offense or pleasure. Cook's own meticulous charting continued, his instruments busy capturing the precise shape of the bays and the elevation of the volcanic peaks that dominated the island's interior. He saw the potential of these sheltered harbors, the abundant resources that could sustain a considerable number of ships and men, a stark contrast to the barren shores encountered in the far south. The sheer beauty of the place, the vibrant colors of the birds and flowers, the crystalline clarity of the water teeming with colorful fish offered a welcome respite, a balm to souls wearied by the endless challenges of the ocean. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound paradise, a subtle shift began to occur, a growing unease felt by both sides as the weeks passed. The constant presence of so many foreign faces, the insatiable curiosity of the newcomers, and the repeated requests for provisions began to weigh upon the islanders, whose own needs and customs remained paramount. The sailors, too, started to feel the strain, their patience tested by the unfamiliar social protocols and the occasional frustrations that arose from misinterpretations of intentions or actions. The islanders watched the sailors with increasing scrutiny, their initial awe tempered by a growing awareness of the foreign visitors' desires and needs. They saw how the sailors' attention often focused on specific items, ropes, tools, even pieces of the ships themselves, and how their disappointment could be a palpable thing when these requests were not immediately met. This discernment of wants, of a different kind of desire than what usually drove their own interactions, began to create a subtle distance, a growing awareness of separate worlds colliding. This period of exploration and initial contact laid a foundation of mutual observation, a first tentative step into understanding one another's ways. The sailors learned much about the rich tapestry of life on these islands, the intricate relationship the Kanaka Maoli had with their environment, and the complex social order that governed their communities. The islanders, in turn, observed the newcomers' tools, their ships, and their methods, their minds processing these encounters, shaping their own understanding of the world beyond their shores, a world now represented by these imposing vessels. As the supply of fresh provisions began to dwindle and the season for further exploration drew to a close, the crews of the Resolution and Discovery prepared to depart, their holds filled with the fruits of their labor and their minds with memories of this extraordinary land. The initial wonder and exchange had been a significant chapter in their long journey, a reminder of the vast diversity of humanity and the enduring allure of lands previously unknown, even as the subtle undercurrents of difference hinted at the complexities that lay ahead. The gentle trade winds that had once propelled the Resolution towards these shores now seemed to carry a sharper edge, a subtle shift in their caress that mirrored the growing unease aboard. The initial wonder and openness that had marked the crew's arrival in Hawaii had begun to fray at the edges, much like the worn ropes that secured their vessels to the sandy bottom of Kealakekwa Bay. A few weeks ago, the exchange of goods had been a joyous affair. The islanders, the Kanaka Maoli, offered plentiful yams and fruits, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic thud of their wooden mallets on woven mats, while the sailors traded metal tools that gleamed in the bright sun. Now, however, the same abundance felt tinged with something less welcoming, a sense that the scales had tipped and the balance of exchange had been disrupted. The sailors, accustomed to the rigid order of the Royal Navy, found themselves increasingly frustrated by what they perceived as a lack of respect from the Kanaka Maoli for their laws and customs. Small items, easily overlooked at first, began to disappear with a regularity that could no longer be dismissed as accidental. A coil of rope here, a metal pot there, these pilferings, seemingly minor to the islanders, who saw the ship's supplies as a vast shared bounty, were to the crew a direct challenge to their authority and a threat to their own limited possessions. One evening, after discovering a longboat had been tampered with and essential tools removed, the tension that had simmered for days threatened to boil over as the men muttered darkly about the insubordinate nature of the locals. Meanwhile, across the bay, the Kanaka Maoli observed the growing frustration of the visitors with a mixture of confusion and apprehension. They understood the concept of ownership, certainly, but the sheer quantity of what the foreigners possessed and their apparent distress over losing a fraction of it was difficult to comprehend. From their perspective, the strangers were like guests who, having arrived with little,
now seemed to hoard their possessions with a peculiar intensity. Their own society was structured around sharing and reciprocal obligation, where a chief might distribute goods freely to demonstrate his mana, his spiritual power and prestige, and they saw little difference in offering items to the visitors who had brought such novelties to their shores. The careful observations the crew had meticulously recorded regarding the Kanaka Moli's social hierarchy and spiritual practices began to feel less like scholarly notes and more like observations of a system that was now actively resisting them. Cook, who had navigated treacherous reefs and icy waters with unwavering resolve, found himself grappling with a conflict of a different sort, one where understanding and force seemed ill-suited companions. He had attempted to navigate these new waters through diplomacy and observation, much as he had charted the coast of New Zealand, but the intricate web of island custom seemed to ensnare his usual methods, leaving him increasingly bewildered and his patience wearing thin.
One particular incident, stemming from the disappearance of a valuable cutter from the Discovery, marked a significant turning point in the already strained relationship. The loss was not merely the object itself, but a deep insult to the authority of the ships. Cook, feeling that every avenue of peaceful recovery had been exhausted, consulted with his officers, the concern etched deeply on their sun-weathered faces. They debated the best course of action, their voices low and serious, the familiar clang of the ship's bell marking the hours seeming to underscore the gravity of their predicament. With many suggesting a strong hand was now the only language understood. The decision was made, and though some among the officers expressed quiet reservations, they ultimately deferred to their captain's authority. Cook, believing he held a valuable bargaining chip, resolved to take Kalaniʻopu, the revered chief of the island, as a hostage until the stolen cutter and its crew were returned. It was a tactic that had, in other circumstances, proven effective in asserting control and ensuring cooperation. However, the cultural chasm here was far wider than any they had previously encountered, and the implications of such an action were not fully grasped by the determined captain, setting the stage for a catastrophic misunderstanding. As the dawn broke, the crew watched with a mixture of apprehension and grim resolve as Cook, accompanied by a small contingent of sailors, rowed towards the shore to confront the chief. The Kanaka Maoli, who had gathered to witness the morning rituals and the ongoing exchanges, saw the armed men approaching and sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a palpable tension that settled over the familiar morning mist rising from the water. The islanders, who had offered their hospitality so freely just days before, now began to gather in greater numbers, their expressions transitioning from curiosity to a deep and growing concern for their leader. The interactions that followed unfolded with a speed that defied comprehension, a chaotic cascade of events born from a fundamental misunderstanding of intent and consequence. When Cook reached for Kalaniʻopu, intending to escort him to the boats, a cry went up from the gathered islanders. They saw their revered leader being forcibly taken, an act that was not a negotiation, but an outrage against their very society and its deeply held traditions. The air, which had been filled with the calls of seabirds and the gentle lapping of waves, was suddenly rent by shouts and the brandishing of spears and clubs, a stark warning that the fragile peace had irrevocably shattered. The sailors, armed with muskets, formed a protective cordon around Cook and the struggling chief, their movements precise and drilled, but their faces betrayed a dawning realization that their carefully laid plans had gone terribly awry. The Kanaka Maoli, their numbers swelling by the moment, surged forward, their initial shock giving way to a fierce protectiveness and a righteous anger. The intricate dance of cultural exchange had devolved into a desperate struggle, each side reacting to what they perceived as threats and betrayals. the vibrant colors of the islanders a stark contrast to the grim, determined faces. A few of the Europeans, witnessing the sheer number and the ferocity of the islanders, began to feel a prickle of fear, a sensation unfamiliar to seasoned sailors who had faced storms and the vast unknown. They had come with maps and instruments, expecting to chart and record, not to engage in a desperate fight for survival against people whose world they had only just begun to glimpse. The casual exchanges of a few weeks prior seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the stark reality of a people defending their land and their leader with every ounce of their being, a testament to the deep bonds of community. The scholarly debate among historians centuries later would center on the precise moment of irreversible escalation, a point where communication irrevocably broke down, leading to the tragic confrontation. Some would suggest Cook's decision to use Kalani'ōpuʻu as a hostage was an understandable, albeit misguided, attempt to regain control in an increasingly untenable situation, a pragmatic if harsh naval maneuver. Others, however, would argue that it was a profound misreading of the islanders' social structure, a failure to grasp the immense respect and loyalty they held for their paramount chief, and thus an action that was doomed to ignite widespread fury and resistance, a fatal miscalculation of cultural nuance. The events on the beach unfolded with a brutal finality that sent ripples of shock through both communities. The precision of the naval training was no match for the overwhelming numbers and the desperate courage of the Kanaka Maoli defending their homeland. The meticulously planned voyage, which had aimed to map and discover, now faced an unimaginable catastrophe, a stark reminder that the human element, with all its complexities, often defied the neat lines drawn on charts or the predictable outcomes of scientific observation, leaving the surviving crew reeling from an unforeseen and devastating loss. Around the bay, the familiar sounds of daily life continued their ancient rhythm, though now tinged with the shock and grief of what had transpired on the sands. The small fishing village of Ai, nestled on the shores of Kealakekua Bay, had known a fragile peace. For generations, the rhythms of life had been dictated by the sun, the sea, and the intricate social order governed by powerful chiefs and revered priests. This world, vibrant with the scent of roasting breadfruit and the murmur of everyday tasks, was suddenly disrupted by the sight of colossal vessels, their sails billowing like captured clouds, emerging from the vast blue. Curiosity mingled with trepidation rippled through the community, as elders whispered of prophecies and the younger generations stared with wide-eyed wonder at these strange floating islands and the pale-skinned beings who emerged from them. A profound sense of bewilderment settled upon the people of Ai as they watched the newcomers. These men, clad in strange, stiff garments, moved with an alien purpose, their tools unfamiliar, and their language a baffling series of sounds. A few bold souls, driven by the spirit of their island culture, approached with offerings of fruit and woven mats, seeking to understand these visitors. Yet the smiles of welcome were met with blank stares, and the attempts at shared understanding were often muddled by a chasm of unspoken customs. This initial cautious exchange, meant to foster goodwill, began to reveal the profound differences that separated their worlds, like currents pulling in opposite directions. The arrival of these European ships had been a cause for initial celebration, a disruption that promised new goods and perhaps even new knowledge. However, as days turned into weeks, a subtle unease began to creep into the interactions. A vital tool, a cherished carving, a small wooden boat, items that held significant value or meaning, went missing from the ships. The frustration among the visitors grew, their voices becoming sharper, their gestures more demanding. Within the community, a sense of hurt and a fierce protectiveness over their ways began to take root, a quiet resistance to the perceived intrusions and accusations. Cook, seeing the continued disappearance of his ship's cutter, a crucial piece of equipment, found himself caught in a difficult position. He had come to explore, to chart, but also to maintain order and discipline aboard his vessels. The islanders, who had initially welcomed him with open arms, now seemed to be acting with a defiance that threatened the safety and progress of his mission. He reasoned that a strong statement was needed, a decisive action to recover what was lost and to re-establish the respect his authority demanded, even in this distant land. Cook, seeing the continued disappearance of his ship's cutter, a crucial piece of equipment, found himself caught in a difficult position. He had come to explore, to chart, but also to maintain order and discipline aboard his vessels. The islanders, who had initially welcomed him with open arms, now seemed to be acting with a defiance that threatened the safety and progress of his mission. He reasoned that a strong statement was needed, a decisive action to recover what was lost and to re-establish the respect his authority demanded, even in this distant land. He decided upon a course of action that seemed, to his mind, a necessary measure of control. He would prevent the departure of the powerful chief Kalaniopuu from the shore, holding him as a surety until the missing property was returned. This tactic, which might have yielded results in other ports, was met with an unexpected and fierce reaction here. As Cook approached the chief, a palpable shift occurred amongst the watching villagers. Their initial awe gave way to a simmering anger, a unified sense of outrage at the disrespect shown to their leader, a man deeply woven into the fabric of their society. The air crackled with unspoken tension as Cook made his move. He advanced toward Kalaniopuu, his hand outstretched, intent on ensuring the chief did not reach the safety of his canoe. But as he stepped forward, the villagers, who had gathered in large numbers, surged around them. Their expressions, once curious or wary, now burned with protective fury. They saw not a negotiator, but an aggressor, a man threatening their sacred chief, their very way of life, with an alien concept of ownership and restraint. Then chaos erupted. Shouts filled the bay, a stark contrast to the usual gentle lapping of waves. The sharp edges of spears, carved from wood and tipped with sharpened stone, glinted in the light as the islanders moved to defend their leader. Cook, surprised by the ferocity of the response, found himself and his men caught in a maelstrom. The carefully laid plans for a peaceful resolution dissolved into a desperate struggle for survival. The swiftness of the attack overwhelmed the armed sailors. The islanders, fighting on their familiar ground, with a deep-seated courage born of defending their home, pressed their advantage. The sounds of conflict, the sharp cries of the warriors, the panicked shouts of the sailors, the ringing clang of metal against wood echoed across the bay, a tragic testament to the fatal misunderstanding that had taken root. In the confusion and fury, the life of the celebrated navigator was extinguished. As the final moments unfolded on the sands of Kealakekua Bay, a profound silence descended upon the stunned survivors. The vibrant community, so recently a tapestry of curiosity and nascent understanding, was now fractured by violence. The lingering scent of salt water and the cries of seabirds seemed to mock the stillness that followed the storm of conflict. The loss of their captain was a blow that reverberated through the hearts of the remaining crew, leaving an emptiness that stretched across the vast ocean and into an uncertain future. The surviving members of the expedition, their faces etched with grief and a dawning realization of their predicament, began the somber task of recovery and regrouping. The immediate concern was to retrieve what remained of their commander and to ensure the continued safety of the two ships. The weight of their loss pressed heavily upon them as they looked towards the endless horizon, their journey home now burdened by a tragedy that would forever alter their experiences and the accounts they would carry back to distant shores. The memories of the friendly smiles and the subsequent fury would forever be entwined with the breathtaking beauty of these islands. The community of Ai, though victorious in their defense, felt the sting of their actions. They had protected their chief and their customs, but the departure of the great ships now left a void, and the memory of the violent clash served as a solemn reminder of the fragility of peace. They looked at the departing vessels, small specks on the vast sea, and wondered about the wider world from which these strangers had come, and the ripples their brief, intense encounter would cast across the lives of their people. The taste of salt and regret lingered in the air. The lingering scent of smoke from the skirmish clung to the air as the ships prepared to depart, a stark reminder of the day's tragic events. The community of Ai, having stood their ground to protect their paramount chief, now turned inward, their faces a mixture of sorrow and unwavering resolve. The distant calls of the shorebirds seemed to carry a mournful melody, a lament for the life that had been so abruptly ended on their sacred shores, a testament to the powerful forces unleashed when two worlds collided with such devastating impact.
The enduring scent of the sea, now mixed with a hint of apprehension, remained with the surviving crew. They carried with them not only the detailed maps and scientific observations of their voyage, but also the profound and painful lesson learned on the shores of Kealakekua Bay. The world had revealed new wonders, but also the deep complexities and potential for conflict inherent in encounters across vast cultural divides, a truth etched not on parchment, but in the raw experience of their loss. The taste of sea salt on their lips was now accompanied by the bittersweet memory of a place that had offered both unparalleled beauty and an unexpected end. The vastness of the ocean, once a symbol of opportunity and discovery, now also represented a space that held both immense knowledge and the lingering shadow of a profound human cost. These experiences would forever shape their understanding of the world and the peoples who inhabited its many shores, a journey that had begun with charting the unknown, but ultimately led to a deeper, more somber comprehension of humanity itself. The creak of the Discovery's timbers provided a mournful, familiar rhythm as the survivors of Kealakekua Bay wrestled with their profound loss. Grief sat heavy on the hearts of officers and men alike, a palpable shroud that seemed to dampen even the salt spray. The immediate need to re-establish order amid the chaos was paramount, for the vast Pacific offered no solace, only an endless expanse of ocean that now felt infinitely more daunting without their captain's steady hand at the helm. The absence of his sharp gaze, which could pierce through doubt and navigate the most complex situations, left a void that no amount of duty could fully fill. Following this somber realization, the remaining officers, led by Lieutenant James King and Lieutenant John Gore, found themselves in quiet, urgent deliberation. They examined the logs, rereading Cook's meticulous notes, searching for any directive or insight that might guide their next steps, a debate unfolding not over strategy, but over the very interpretation of the events that had transpired. Was the initial reverence shown by the islanders a sign of divine welcome, or merely a pause before a deeper, more dangerous misunderstanding took root? This internal wrestling with the past, the attempt to find sense in the senseless, occupied their waking hours as much as the practicalities of survival. Building on this foundation of grief and introspection, the immediate imperative was to secure what remained of their expedition and prepare for the arduous journey home, a journey that now felt less like a triumph of discovery and more like an escape with heavy hearts. The recovery of Cook's remains had been a fraught, even grim undertaking, a stark reminder of the human cost of their quest for knowledge.
The sailors, accustomed to the structured hierarchy of the Royal Navy, now found themselves adrift in a sea of uncertainty, their shared purpose fractured by the tragedy. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the news of Cook's demise would eventually ripple outwards, painting him in different lights depending on the listener's perspective, sparking discussions about the consequences of exploration and the clash of worlds. Back on the ships, the surviving crew members, clinging to routine as a lifeline, meticulously organized their findings, ensuring the scientific specimens and detailed charts, the tangible legacy of their late commander's vision, were preserved. The weight of carrying this immense collection of knowledge, gathered at such a terrible price, added another layer to their already burdened spirits. The process of resuming their mission to complete the charting of the Pacific's intricate coastlines felt like a testament to Cook's enduring influence, a somber echo of his dedication to precision and discovery. The officers had to make difficult choices, navigating not only treacherous waters, but also the complex relationships forged with the island communities they encountered. These interactions were now tinged with the awareness of what had occurred, a constant reminder of the fragile peace that could so easily shatter when different customs collided. This method of continuing the voyage involved a renewed focus on caution, a learned wariness that had been absent in the initial enthusiasm of their discoveries. They meticulously documented the islands and peoples they met, their observations now imbued with a deeper understanding of cultural nuances, a stark contrast to the earlier, perhaps more naive, cataloging of unfamiliar sights and sounds. The crew members themselves, though hardened by their experiences, carried the unspoken debates about Cook's final decisions, his choice to attempt taking a chief hostage, a decision that seemed increasingly fraught with peril in retrospect. Furthermore, the scientific community in Britain eagerly awaited the return of the Resolution and Discovery, anticipating the detailed maps that would redefine the known world and the botanical and zoological discoveries that would enrich European understanding of nature. These charts, painstakingly drawn by Cook's skilled surveyors, represented a significant leap forward in cartography, correcting errors and filling in vast blank spaces on the world map with an accuracy that would prove invaluable for future navigation and trade. This aspect of his legacy, the sheer volume and precision of his mapping, stood in sharp contrast to the personal tragedy that had befallen him. Consequently, the long voyage home was not merely a return passage, but a period of profound reflection for the men who had served under Cook. They carried not only the scientific bounty of their expeditions, but also the heavy burden of their commander's fate and the complex lessons learned about human interaction across vastly different cultures. The shared experience forged a unique bond among the survivors, a quiet camaraderie born from facing adversity and loss together in the remote corners of the earth. In these quiet moments, the surviving officers could almost forget the weight of the captain's ultimate sacrifice. In the hushed halls of the Royal Society, the air hummed with anticipation, much like the moment before a rare celestial event. Scholars gathered, their faces illuminated by the glow of oil lamps, as stacks of rolled parchment were carefully laid out. These were not just maps, they were the tangible fruit of years spent battling the vastness of the Pacific, and they represented a profound shift in how the world saw itself. The meticulous lines, painstakingly drawn by hand, detailed coastlines previously known only through rumor or vague sailors' tales. The scholars peered closely at the intricate representations of New Zealand's bays and the sprawling, treacherous network of reefs that guarded Australia's eastern shores. Each curve of a coastline, each marked depth, represented hours of painstaking observation and often nail-biting navigation.
The delicate illustrations accompanying the charts, depicting strange new plants and birds, were examined with equal fascination, their accuracy a testament to the combined efforts of botanists and skilled draftsmen. These visual records provided a window into worlds entirely unknown, offering glimpses of life and landscape far removed from England's green fields.
One learned gentleman, stroking his chin thoughtfully, pointed to a particular section of a map. He spoke of the challenges of measuring longitude at sea, a puzzle that had vexed navigators for generations. He explained how precise timekeeping devices, known as chronometers, had been crucial in their efforts to pinpoint their position with greater accuracy. The sheer dedication required to keep these instruments functioning on a rolling ship, subjected to the constant damp and motion of the ocean, was a feat in itself, a testament to human ingenuity against formidable odds. This new understanding of geography was not merely academic, it held immense practical value. Naval strategists studied the detailed routes, identifying potential harbors and safe passages for future voyages of trade and exploration. Merchants pored over the information, envisioning new trade routes and possibilities for acquiring exotic goods. The charts themselves became symbols of British prowess, tangible proof of their expanding reach and influence across the globe. The scientific community, in particular, buzzed with excitement over the vast collections of specimens and detailed notes. Botanists meticulously cataloged new species of plants, identifying those with potential medicinal properties or economic value. Zoologists described the unique creatures encountered, from the flightless birds of the southern islands to the curious marine life catalogued with careful sketches. This influx of new knowledge sparked further debate and research, igniting a thirst for even more discoveries. The observations of the stars, especially those related to the transit of Venus, were particularly prized. The precise measurements taken during this rare astronomical event were intended to help determine the distance between the Earth and the Sun, a fundamental question that had long occupied the minds of scientists. The collective effort involved in these celestial observations, spanning vast distances and requiring immense precision, highlighted the collaborative nature of scientific inquiry during that era. Among the members of the Royal Society, a gentle murmur of respect rippled through the room as they discussed the courage and perseverance of the men who had brought these findings home. They spoke of the sheer scale of the undertaking, the long months at sea, and the constant exposure to unknown dangers. The dedication to scientific accuracy, even in the face of hardship, was a recurring theme in their conversations, a quiet admiration for the individuals who pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. The detailed maps also represented a challenge to existing understandings of the world's geography. Old maps, often based on conjecture and fragmented reports, were now being superseded by Cook's precise renderings. The vast, uncharted spaces that had once symbolized mystery were gradually being filled in, revealing a more complete and accurate picture of the Earth's surface. This process of meticulous mapping was slowly but surely reshaping the collective consciousness of the European world. The specimens brought back offered a different kind of revelation, showcasing the incredible diversity of life on Earth. Dried plants, preserved insects, and detailed sketches of unfamiliar animals arrived in England, each a tiny ambassador from distant lands. These tangible pieces of the world sparked wonder and curiosity, prompting questions about the forces that shaped such varied forms of existence. The sheer volume of these discoveries hinted at how much more there was yet to be learned.
A quiet debate, however, began to stir amongst a few of the more thoughtful observers. They considered the implications of these discoveries not just for scientific advancement, but for the people who already inhabited these newly charted lands. While the maps delineated physical boundaries, the human element, the presence and traditions of the indigenous populations encountered, remained a complex and often understated aspect of the expedition's findings. The precise nature of the interactions with these diverse communities was a subject of much discussion. Some accounts spoke of peaceful exchanges and mutual curiosity, while others hinted at misunderstandings and moments of friction. The challenges of bridging vast cultural divides, of communicating across languages and customs, were implicitly present in the logs and journals that accompanied the charts and specimens. These records offered a glimpse into the delicate balance of exploration and encounter. The process of creating such comprehensive charts was inherently a matter of extending boundaries, not just on paper, but in the collective understanding of the world. For generations, many of these lands had existed in European minds as little more than nebulous myths, places where imagination often outstripped factual knowledge. Cook's work began to anchor these distant locations in a shared, verifiable reality, transforming them into subjects of study and potential engagement for a wider audience. As the evening drew to a close and the scholars prepared to depart, a sense of profound accomplishment settled over the room. The tangible results of the voyages spread before them represented a monumental leap forward in understanding the planet. The charts had woven themselves so completely into their world. The reports from the Society's recent gatherings began to circulate, their polished pages filled with meticulous drawings of plants and intricate maps of coastlines previously unknown to European eyes. Back in London, men in powdered wigs debated the implications of these findings, their voices rising and falling in learned discussions about geography and the natural world. Some spoke of these new lands with a sense of possessive awe, their words painting a picture of Britain's growing dominion, while others, more quietly, wondered about the lives touched by these distant explorations. These discussions, however, often felt removed from the practical realities that had forged the man whose name was now on everyone's lips. Those who spoke of the navigator's triumphs rarely dwelled on the gruff realities of his beginnings. Far from grand halls, young James learned the bite of sea salt and the ache of honest labor in the coastal village of Whitby. His apprenticeship was not one of quiet study, but of hauling ropes that chafed raw his palms and scrubbing decks until his knuckles bled. The constant need for coin, a sharp spur, driving him through each demanding day. He learned the rhythm of the tides not from books, but from the groaning timbers of fishing vessels and the rough hands of seasoned sailors, who taught him more through gruff instruction than gentle guidance. As the years passed and his skills sharpened, whispers of his competence reached the ears of those who sought able men for His Majesty's expanding fleet. The call to the Royal Navy meant a step up, trading the familiar, albeit harsh, life of coastal fishing for the disciplined, often unforgiving, world of naval service. He found himself among hundreds of men, a sea of varied faces, all bound by the same iron discipline that governed the grand ships of the line, a stark contrast to the independent life he had known. This transition demanded a different kind of strength, a capacity to absorb commands and execute them without question, a skill honed through countless hours of practice, and a keen understanding of how to navigate both the seas and the rigid hierarchy. The tales that emerged from the Pacific, however, began to paint a more complex portrait than the simple accounts of discovery. While official pronouncements celebrated the charting of new territories and the scientific marvels uncovered, other, less public conversations emerged among those who had been present. There were accounts of swift exchanges of goods, of curiosity met with generosity, but also of moments where understanding faltered, leaving behind a residue of suspicion. The navigator himself, in his detailed journals, often expressed a quiet frustration with what he perceived as a lack of discipline or respect from certain peoples, a stark difference to the immediate obedience he expected from his own men. These diverging perspectives sparked a quiet but persistent debate that rippled through learned circles and whispered through port taverns alike. While the navigator's skill in charting the vast oceans was undeniable, earning him widespread admiration and a place of honor, the nature of his interactions with the lands and peoples he encountered became a subject of more nuanced consideration. Some saw his actions as those of a man striving to impose order and efficiency in unfamiliar territories, a necessary approach for exploration. Others, however, began to question the underlying assumptions, the expectation that all peoples should conform to European customs or readily cede control over their own resources. The popular press, eager for tales of adventure and national pride, largely focused on the former narrative, casting the navigator as a heroic figure, a symbol of British ingenuity and courage. Illustrations depicted him standing tall against imposing landscapes, a resolute leader bringing light and order to the unknown. His voyages were presented as purely scientific endeavors, a testament to human curiosity and the relentless pursuit of knowledge, with any friction smoothed over or attributed to the inherent wildness of the lands he explored. This portrayal cemented his image as a national icon, a figure celebrated in songs and etchings that adorned the walls of drawing rooms across the nation.
Yet, beneath the surface of this triumphant narrative, other voices began to surface, often years or even decades later, brought forth by new generations who sifted through the navigator's own words and the accounts of those who followed. These quieter examinations brought to light the cultural chimes and dissonances that had occurred, the instances where European expectations clashed with deeply ingrained traditions. They highlighted the navigator's own internal struggle, his moments of impatience, and his attempts to understand peoples whose ways of life were fundamentally different from his own, revealing a more human and perhaps more complicated legacy than the heroic portraits suggested. This careful reconsideration brought forth a new appreciation for the navigator's meticulous approach to mapping and scientific observation, acknowledging the immense effort and precision required to chart such vast and previously unknown regions. However, it also prompted a deeper understanding of the impact his discoveries had, not just on maps and scientific collections, but on the very societies he encountered. The gifts exchanged, the observations recorded, and the territories claimed all contributed to a global shift, a reshaping of relationships between distant cultures and the expanding influence of European powers. A complex tapestry woven with threads of discovery, exchange, and the inevitable consequences of encounter. As the day drew to a close and the lanterns began to cast their warm glow across the study, the pages of the navigator's journals lay open, their careful script a testament to a life dedicated to the sea and the unknown. The debate about his place in history was far from settled, each new generation adding its own perspective, its own understanding of the man and the world he so diligently measured. The quill felt familiar in his hand as he continued to trace the lines of a coastline on a fresh sheet of parchment, the faint scratching sound a comforting companion in the quiet room. The ships that had sailed so far, the Resolution and the Discovery, now found themselves anchor chains deep in the embrace of unfamiliar waters. their crews weary, but their purpose not yet fully realized. While the echoes of the northern voyages still hummed in the ears of many, a new horizon beckoned, one that drew the gaze of men across vast stretches of sea, a vastness that had been reshaped by the meticulous work of the navigators who had charted its previously unseen edges. The meticulous lines drawn by skilled hands on parchment, those detailed maps of coastlines and islands previously only whispered in legends, now began to connect, revealing a world far grander and more complex than many had ever imagined. These drawn lines, born from careful observation and the steady hand of men like Cook, did more than just trace geography. They began to redraw the very boundaries of human understanding, pulling distant lands into a shared, if sometimes fraught, global consciousness. Back in the crowded halls of learned societies, where eager eyes devoured the reports and specimens brought across the oceans, a different kind of charting was taking place. The precise measurements of latitude and longitude, the carefully catalogued plants with their strange blossoms and potent properties, and the vivid sketches of peoples whose lives unfolded under different skies, all of these were painstakingly examined. This influx of knowledge, painstakingly gathered across countless leagues of ocean and through challenging encounters, fueled a burgeoning desire for further exploration among those who held sway in the great European powers. The success of voyages like Cook's, demonstrating the feasibility of reaching and understanding these far-flung places, ignited a fervent competition, a race to claim influence and resources in lands that until recently had existed only in tales and conjecture. As the world grew smaller on paper, the ripples of these discoveries began to spread, touching lives in ways both grand and subtle, reaching even the smallest coastal villages where news of distant lands arrived slowly, carried by the wind and the words of returning sailors. For the communities whose shores had been touched by these expeditions, the arrival of the ships marked a profound turning point, a moment where their long-held ways of life, shaped by generations of adaptation to their local environments, met a powerful new force. These encounters, often born of curiosity and a shared need for resources, were complex tapestries woven with threads of mutual observation and, at times, deep misunderstanding, revealing the vast spectrum of human experience and the varied paths societies had taken. The sheer breadth of the discoveries, the sheer volume of new information about the Earth's diverse inhabitants and landscapes began to reshape the very understanding of the world for those who remained in Europe. It was no longer enough to simply sail from one known port to another. The great naval powers now looked outwards, their ambitions fueled by the promise of trade, scientific knowledge, and strategic advantage. The maps that Cook's expeditions had so painstakingly created became blueprints for future endeavors, guiding vessels not just to discover, but to establish connections, to trade, and, in time, to exert influence, thereby knitting together a world that had once been a collection of separate realms. The process of connecting these diverse parts of the globe, however, was not a simple matter of drawing lines on a map. It involved intricate negotiations and exchanges between peoples who possessed vastly different customs, understandings of ownership, and ways of interacting with the natural world. For the communities who had lived for millennia in their ancestral lands, the arrival of outsiders often brought unforeseen changes, disrupting established patterns of life and introducing new challenges that demanded resilience and adaptation. The impact of these voyages rippled far beyond the immediate encounters, setting in motion a chain of events that would reshape the destinies of peoples across continents, influencing everything from local economies to cultural practices. Meanwhile, across the vastness of the Pacific, the indigenous populations who had welcomed or cautiously observed the European ships began to grapple with the implications of this new, expansive world. Their own sophisticated knowledge of the seas, their understanding of celestial movements, and their intricate social structures, honed over countless generations, now had to contend with external forces that operated on a scale they had not previously known. The seeds of change sown during those initial encounters began to sprout, influencing trade, introducing new technologies, and subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, altering the very fabric of their societies, demanding new ways to maintain their own distinct identities amidst a rapidly shifting global landscape. The collective impact of these explorations, undertaken with a spirit of scientific inquiry and national pride, ultimately contributed to a fundamental transformation in global relationships. What had begun as voyages of discovery, driven by a desire to map the unknown and understand the world's natural wonders, inevitably led to increased contact between disparate cultures and the establishment of new networks of trade and communication. These connections, while expanding horizons and sharing knowledge, also laid the groundwork for broader patterns of European expansion and influence that would continue to unfold for generations, forever altering the course of human history for countless communities. The careful, methodical work of charting coastlines and observing the natural world, the very essence of what had driven men like Cook, had a profound effect on how people understood their place in the world. The detailed maps that emerged from these expeditions, often drawn with incredible precision, revealed the true scale of continents and oceans, providing a tangible framework for this expanding global awareness. This new geographical understanding facilitated not only further exploration, but also the establishment of more direct and regular communication and trade routes, weaving together the disparate corners of the Earth into a more interconnected, albeit sometimes unequal, whole. The long-term consequences of this era of intensified exploration were far-reaching, influencing not just the maps on the walls of royal courts, but also the daily lives of communities on every continent. The introduction of new goods and technologies, the establishment of trade partnerships, and the subsequent interactions between European powers and indigenous peoples created complex and enduring relationships that continued to evolve. These encounters fostered both cooperation and conflict, introducing new challenges and opportunities that required communities to adapt and respond in innovative ways, forever changing the patterns of life and interaction across the globe. The shared experience of navigating these complex interactions, of charting not just physical territories but also the currents of cultural exchange and the challenges of building bridges between different societies, highlights the universal human drive to understand and connect with the world around us. As the ships sailed homeward, laden with their discoveries, they left behind a world that was, in many ways, irrevocably changed. A world where the boundaries of knowledge had been pushed outward, and the interconnectedness of humanity had become increasingly apparent, for better and for worse. The enduring legacy of these expeditions is a complex one, a testament to human curiosity and perseverance, but also a reminder of the profound and often unforeseen consequences that arise when different worlds collide. The knowledge gained and the territories mapped shaped the course of empires and the destinies of nations, initiating an era of globalization that continues to influence our world today, prompting reflection on the diverse paths human societies have taken and the ways in which they continue to shape each other. The day's arduous journey across the vast interconnected seas had undeniably left its mark on the global tapestry. But life in the bustling port cities and the quiet villages, from London to distant islands, moved forward. As the stars begin to glimmer, let us drift away from the adventurous spirit of Captain Cook's remarkable journeys. Imagine the steady rhythm of the HMS Endeavour, a familiar sound to those who sailed her vast distances. Picture the quiet anticipation on deck as new coastlines emerged from the morning mist, lands untouched by European eyes until Cook's charting. Think of the shared moments, the camaraderie forged through challenging voyages, and the profound respect, sometimes complex, sometimes fraught, that developed with the indigenous peoples they encountered across the Pacific.
Tonight, as we put away our charts and cease our own explorations, let the gentle cadence of those voyages lull you to sleep. The vast ocean, once a frontier for Cook's ambition and curiosity, now cradles you in quiet. May the memory of his enduring legacy, the meticulous maps drawn, and the daring spirit of naval exploration bring you a deep and peaceful slumber. Rest now, and let the tides of dreams carry you through the night. Rest now, and let the tides of dreams carry you through the night.